Today my topic of discussion is a novel, David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. Before the introduction, let's see some facts about the novel, David Copperfield. Full title of the novel is The Personal History and Experience of David Copperfield the Younger. Author is Charles Dickens. Type of work is novel. David Copperfield has come to be Dickens's darling. It is because it is the most autobiographical of all his novels. Genre is Bildungsroman, coming-of-age novel. Language, English. Time and place written, May 1849 to November 1850, England. Date of first publication, May 1849, November 1850, serial publication. Publisher of this novel, Bradbury and Evans. Narrator of David Copperfield is an older David Copperfield narrates the story of his childhood from his happy home in London. Point of view, David writes in the first person, limiting his viewpoint to what he sees in his youth and his attitude at that time. Tone, David reflects upon his youth fondly and remembers his naive youth wistfully. Tense, past. Time setting, 1800s. Place setting, England. Protagonist, David Copperfield. Major conflict is, David struggles to become a man in a cruel world, with little money and few people to guide him. Themes are, the plight of the weak, equality in marriage, wealth and class. Motifs are, the role of mothers, accented speech, physical beauty. Symbols are, the sea, flowers, Mr. Dick's kite. Following are the foreshadowing found in this novel. The opening scene's observation that David's birth is inauspicious. The adult David's remark that little Emily would have been better off if the sea had swallowed her as a child. Agnes's distrust of Steerforth. Agnes's blush when David asks her about her love life. David Copperfield is the contemporary of two major memory-based works. 1. William Wordsworth's The Prelude, 1850. An autobiographical poem about the formative experiences of his youth. And 2. Tennyson's In Memoriam, 1850, which eulogizes the memory of his friend, Arthur Hallam. Let's start with the introduction. David Copperfield is a novel by English author Charles Dickens, narrated by the eponymous David Copperfield, detailing his adventures in his journey from infancy to maturity. The novel is typically categorized in the Bildungsroman genre. It was published as a serial in 1849 and 1850, and then as a book in 1850. David Copperfield is also a partially autobiographical novel, with events following Dickens's own life. Dickens writes that it was his favorite, called The Triumph of the Art of Dickens. It marks a turning point in his work, separating the novels of youth and those of maturity. At first glance, the work is modeled on 18th-century personal histories that were very popular, like Henry Fielding's Joseph Andrews or Tom Jones, but David Copperfield is a more carefully structured work. It begins, like other novels by Dickens, with a bleak picture of childhood in Victorian England. Dickens wrote without an outline, unlike his previous novel, Dombey and Son. Some aspects of the story were fixed in his mind from the start, but others were undecided until the serial publications were underway. The novel has a primary theme of growth and change, but Dickens also satirizes many aspects of Victorian life. These include the plight of prostitutes, the status of women in marriage, class structure, the criminal justice system, the quality of schools, and the employment of children in factories. It is very disgusting that Dickens deals with above 35 characters in this novel. Let's see the characters in David Copperfield. 1. David Copperfield is the narrator and protagonist of the novel. David's father, David Sr., dies 6 months before he is born, and he is raised by his mother and nursemaid Peggotty until his mother remarries. David's stepfather, Mr. Murdstone, sends David away to a boarding school. While attending school, David learns his mother has died, on his 9th birthday. He is sent to work at a factory until he runs away to find his aunt. David Copperfield is characterized in the book as trusting, goal-oriented, but as yet immature. He marries Dora Spenlow and later Agnes Wickfield. 2. Clara Copperfield, David's mother, described as being innocently childish. She is married to David Copperfield Sr. until his death, and gives birth 6 months later to the central character of the novel. She loves and coddles young David with the help of Peggotty. Years later she remarries Mr. Murdstone. She dies a couple of months after the birth of her second son, who dies a day or so later, while David is away at Salem House boarding school. 3. Dr. Edward Chillip, a shy doctor who assists at David's birth and faces the wrath and anger of Betsy Trotwood after he informs her that Clara's baby is a boy instead of the girl. Mr. Chillip, met in London when David Copperfield returns from Switzerland, tells David of the fate of Murdstone's second wife, which is much the same as the fate of David's mother. 4. Edward Murdstone, the main antagonist of the first half of the novel. He is young David's cruel stepfather who beats him for falling behind in his studies and emotionally torments Clara. David reacts by biting Mr. Murdstone and is sent to Salem House, a private school owned by Mr. Murdstone's friend Mr. Creakle, in retribution. After David's mother dies, he sends David to work at his factory in London. He appears at Betsy Trotwood's Dover house after David runs away. Mr. Murdstone appears to show signs of repentance when confronted by Copperfield's aunt about his treatment of Clara and David, but when David works at Doctors' Commons years later, he meets Murdstone taking out a marriage license for his next young and trusting wife. 5. Jane Murdstone, Mr. Murdstone's equally cruel spinster sister, who moves into the Copperfield house shortly after Mr. Murdstone marries Clara Copperfield, taking over the housekeeping. Much like her brother, she is domineering, mean-spirited, and petty. She is the confidential friend of David's first wife, Dora Spenlow, and is the one who found David's letters to Dora, and creates the scene between David Copperfield and Dora's father, Mr. Spenlow. Later, she rejoins her brother and his second wife in a marriage much like the one with David's mother. 6. Clara Peggotty, the faithful servant of the Copperfield family and a lifelong companion to David. He is called by her surname Peggotty within David's family, as her given name is Clara, the same as David's mother. She is also referred to at times as Berkiss after her marriage to Mr. Berkiss. After her husband's death, Peggotty helps to put in order David's rooms in London and then returns to Yarmouth to keep house for her nephew, Ham Peggotty. Following Ham's death, Clara Peggotty keeps house for David's great-aunt, Betsy Trotwood. 7. Mr. Berkiss, an aloof carter who declares his intention to marry Peggotty after eating her handmade pastries. Peggotty marries him after Clara Copperfield's death. He is a miser, keeping an unexpected amount of wealth in a plain box labeled Old Clothes. He bequeaths 2/3 of his money to his wife from his savings of £3,000 when he dies after about 10 years of marriage. He leaves annuities for Mr. Daniel Peggotty, little Emily, and David from the rest. 8. Daniel Peggotty, Peggotty's brother, a humble but generous Yarmouth fisherman who takes his nephew Ham and niece Emily into his custody after each of them has been orphaned. He welcomes David as a child when holidaying in Yarmouth with Peggotty. When Emily is older and runs away with David's friend Steerforth, he travels around the world in search of her. He eventually finds her as a prostitute in London, and after that, they emigrate to Australia. 9. Emily, little Emily, the niece of Daniel Peggotty and his sister Clara Peggotty. Emily is a childhood friend of David Copperfield, who loved her in his childhood days. She abandons Ham, her cousin and fiancé, on the eve of their wedding, disappearing abroad with Steerforth for several years. Broken by Steerforth's desertion, Emily does not go back home, but she does eventually go to London. With the help of Martha, her uncle recovers her from the brink of prostitution, after Rosa Dartle rants at her. She accompanies her uncle to Australia. 10. Ham Peggotty, the good-natured nephew of Mr. Peggotty, who is tall and strong, and becomes a skilled boat builder. Ham is the fiancé of Emily before she leaves him for Steerforth. His aunt, Clara Peggotty, looks after Ham once Emily is gone. When a fierce storm at sea off Yarmouth demasts a merchant ship from the south, Ham attempts to rescue the crew, but is drowned by the ferocity of the waves before he can reach anyone. News of his death, a day before Emily and Mr. Peggotty's emigration, is withheld from his family to enable them to leave without hesitation or remorse. 11. Mrs. Gummidge, the widow of Daniel Peggotty's partner, who is taken in and supported by Daniel after his partner's death. Gummidge is a self-described lone lorn creature who spends much of her time pining for the old un, her late husband. After Emily runs away with Steerforth, Mrs. Gummidge renounces her self-pity and becomes Daniel and Ham's primary caretaker. She too emigrates to Australia with Daniel and Emily. In Australia, when she receives a marriage proposal, she responds by attacking the unlucky suitor with a bucket. 12. Martha Endell, a young woman, once little Emily's friend, who flees to London after an unspecified disgrace. Martha Endell falls into prostitution and is stopped from suicide by Daniel Peggotty and David, resolving to help them recover Emily. She emigrates with the Peggotty family to Australia, where she marries an outback farmer. 13. Mr. Creakle, the harsh headmaster of young David's boarding school, Salem House, who is assisted by the one-legged Tungay. Mr. Creakle is a friend of Mr. Murdstone. He singles out David for extra torment at Murdstone's request, but later treats him normally after David apologizes to Murdstone. With a surprising amount of delicacy, Creakle's wife breaks the news to David that his mother has died. Later, he becomes a Middlesex magistrate and is considered enlightened for his day. Mr. Creakle runs his prison by the system and is portrayed with great sarcasm, as he thinks that his model inmates, Heap and Littimer, have changed their criminal ways because of his intervention. 14. James Steerforth, a student at Creakle School who befriends young David, even as he takes over David's money. James Steerforth is condescending to other social classes, a snob who unhesitatingly takes advantage of his younger friends and uses his mother's influence, going so far as to get Mr. Mell dismissed from the school because Mell's mother lives in an almshouse. Although he grows into a charming and handsome young man, he proves to be lacking in character when he seduces and later abandons little Emily. He eventually drowns at Yarmouth in a fierce storm at sea, washing up on the shore after the merchant ship breaks apart. 15. Tommy Traddles, David's friend from Salem House. Traddles is one of the few boys who does not trust Steerforth and is notable for drawing skeletons on his slate. David speculates that this is to cheer himself up with a macabre thought that his predicaments are only temporary. Tommy Traddles and David meet again later and become lifelong friends. Traddles works hard but faces great obstacles because of his lack of money and connections. He succeeds in making a name and a career for himself, becoming a judge and marrying his true love, Sophie. 16. Wilkins Micawber, a melodramatic, kind-hearted gentleman who has a way with words and eternal optimism. Wilkins Micawber befriends David as a young boy in London, taking him as a lodger. Micawber suffers from financial difficulty and spends time in a debtor's prison before moving his family briefly to Plymouth. Micawber meets David again, passing by the Heap household in Canterbury when David is taking tea there. Micawber takes a position at Wickfield and Heap. Thinking Micawber is weak-minded, Heap makes him an accomplice in several of his schemes, but Micawber turns the tables on his employer and is instrumental in his downfall. Micawber emigrates to Australia, where he enjoys a successful career as a sheep farmer and becomes a magistrate. He is based on Dickens's father, John Dickens, who faced similar financial problems when Dickens was a child, but never emigrated. 17. Emma Micawber, Wilkins Micawber's wife and the mother of their 5 children. Emma Micawber comes from a wealthy family who disapprove of her husband, but she constantly protests that she will never leave Micawber. 18. Mr. Dick, Richard Babberley, a slightly deranged, rather childish but amiable man who lives with Betsy Trotwood. They are distant relatives. Mr. Dick's madness is amply described. He claims to have the trouble of King Charles I in his head. He is fond of making gigantic kites and tries to write a memorial, that is, a petition, though on what subject is never revealed, but is unable to focus and finish it. Despite his limitations, Dick is able to see issues with a certain clarity. He proves to be not only a kind and loyal friend, but also demonstrates a keen emotional intelligence, particularly when he helps Dr. and Mrs. Strong through a marriage crisis. 19. Betsy Trotwood, David's eccentric and temperamental yet kind-hearted great-aunt. She becomes his guardian after he runs away from the Murdstone and Grinby warehouse in Blackfriars, London. Betsy Trotwood is present on the night of David's birth, but leaves after hearing that Clara Copperfield's child is a boy instead of a girl, and is not seen again until David flees to her house in Dover from London. She is portrayed as affectionate towards David, and defends him and his late mother when Mr. Murdstone arrives to take custody of David. She confronts the man and rebukes him for his abuse of David and his mother, then threatens him and drives him off the premises. Universally believed to be a widow, Betsy Trotwood conceals the existence of her ne'er-do-well husband, who occasionally bleeds her for money. 20. Mr. Wickfield, the widowed father of Agnes Wickfield and lawyer to Betsy Trotwood. While David attends school in Canterbury, Mr. Wickfield stays with the Wickfields until he graduates. Mr. Wickfield feels guilty that, through his love, he has hurt his daughter by keeping her too close to himself. This sense of guilt leads him to drink. His apprentice Uriah Heep uses the information to lead Mr. Wickfield down a slippery slope, encouraging the alcoholism and feelings of guilt, and eventually convincing him that he has committed improprieties while inebriated and blackmailing him. Mr. Wickfield is saved by Mr. Micawber, and his friends consider him to have become a better man through the experience. 21. Agnes Wickfield, Mr. Wickfield's mature and lovely daughter and close friend of David since he began school at Dr. Strong's in Canterbury. Agnes nurtures an unrequited love for David for many years, but never tells him, helping and advising him through his infatuation with and marriage to Dora. After David returns to England, Agnes Wickfield realizes his feelings for her, and she becomes David's second wife and mother of their children. 22. Uriah Heep, the main antagonist of the novel's second half. Heep serves first as clerk from age 11 or 12. At age 15, he meets Copperfield and a few years later becomes partner to Mr. Wickfield. Uriah Heep presents himself as self-deprecating and talks of being humble, but gradually reveals his wicked and twisted character. He gains power over Wickfield, but is exposed by Wilkins Micawber and Traddles, who have gathered evidence that Uriah committed many acts of fraud. By forging Mr. Wickfield's signature, he misappropriates the personal wealth of the Wickfield family, together with portfolios entrusted to them by others, including funds belonging to Betsy Trotwood. He fools Wickfield into thinking he has himself committed this act while drunk, and then blackmails him. Heep is defeated but not prosecuted. He is later imprisoned for a separate fraud on the Bank of England. He nurtures a deep hatred of David Copperfield and of many others, though in some ways he is a mirror to David, wanting to get ahead and to marry the boss's daughter. 23. Mrs. Heep, Uriah's mother, who is as sycophantic as her son. Mrs. Heep has instilled in him his lifelong tactic of pretending to be subservient to achieve his goals, and even as his schemes fall apart, she begs him to save himself by being humble. 24. Dr. Strong and Annie Strong, director and assistant of the school David attends in Canterbury. Dr. Strong's main concern is to work on his dictionary, where, at the end of the novel, he has reached the letter D. The doctor is 62 when David meets him, and married about a year to Annie, considerably younger than her husband. In this happy, loving couple, each one cares more about the other than about themselves. The depth of their feeling allows them to defeat the efforts of Uriah Heep in trying to break their union. 25. Jack Maldon, a cousin and childhood sweetheart of Annie Strong. Jack Maldon continues to bear affection for her and assumes she will leave Dr. Strong for him. Instead, Dr. Strong helps Jack Maldon financially and in finding a position. Maldon is charming, and after his time in India, he ends up in London society, in a social circle with Julia Mills. They live a life that seems empty to the adult David Copperfield. 26. Julia Mills. She is a friend of Dora who supports Dora's romance with David Copperfield. Julia Mills moves to India when her father gets a new position. Julia Mills marries a wealthy Scottish man, a Scotch Croesus, and lives in London in the end. She thinks of little besides money. 27. Mrs. Markleham, Annie's mother, nicknamed the Old Soldier by her husband's students for her stubbornness. Mrs. Markleham tries to take pecuniary advantage of her son-in-law Dr. Strong in every way possible, to Annie's sorrow. 28. Mrs. Emma Steerforth, the wealthy widowed mother of James Steerforth. Emma Steerforth dotes on her son to the point of being completely blind to his faults. When Steerforth disgraces his family and the Peggottys by running off with Emily, Mrs. Steerforth blames Emily for corrupting her son, rather than accept that James has disgraced an innocent girl. The news of her son's death destroys her. Emma Steerforth lives on, but she never recovers from the shock. 29. Rosa Dartle, Steerforth's cousin, a bitter, sarcastic spinster who lives with Mrs. Steerforth. Rosa Dartle is secretly in love with Steerforth and blames others such as Emily and Steerforth's mother for corrupting him. Rosa Dartle is described as being thin and displays a visible scar on her lip caused by Steerforth in one of his violent rages as a child. 30. Francis Spenlow, a lawyer, employer of David as a proctor and the father of Dora Spenlow. Francis Spenlow dies suddenly of a heart attack while driving his phaeton home. After his death, it is revealed that he is heavily in debt and left no will. 31. Dora Spenlow, the adorable daughter of Mr. Spenlow who becomes David's first wife after a long courtship. She is described as being impractical and has many similarities to David's mother. In their first year of marriage, David learns their differences as to keeping a house in order. Dora does not learn firmness, but remains herself, affectionate with David and attached to her lapdog, Jip. Dora Spenlow is not unaware of their differences, and asks David, whom she calls Dodie, to think of her as a child wife. Dora Spenlow suffers a miscarriage, which begins a long illness from which she dies with David's childhood friend and later second wife Agnes Wickfield at her side. 32. Littimer, Steerforth's obsequious valet, repeatedly described as being respectable, who is instrumental in aiding his seduction of Emily. Littimer is always polite and correct, but his condescending manner intimidates David, who always feels as if Littimer is reminding him how young he is. He later winds up in prison for embezzlement, and his manners allow Littimer to con his way to the stature of model prisoner in Creakle's establishment. 33. Miss Mosher, a dwarf and Steerforth's hairdresser. Though Miss Mosher participates in Steerforth's circle as a witty and glib gossip, she is strong against the discomfort others might feel associated with her dwarfism. Miss Mosher is later instrumental in Littimer's arrest. 34. Mr. Mell, a poor teacher at Salem House. Mr. Mell takes David to Salem House and is the only adult there who is kind to him. His mother lives in a workhouse, and Mel supports her with his wages. When Steerforth discovers this information from David, he uses it to get Creakle to fire Mel. Near the end of the novel, Copperfield discovers in an Australian newspaper that Mel has emigrated and is now Dr. Mel of Colonial Salem House Grammar School, Port Middlebay, married with children. 35. Sophie Cruller. One of a family of 10 daughters, Sophie runs the household and takes care of all her sisters. Sophie Cruller and Traddles are engaged to be married, but her family has made Sophie so indispensable that they do not want her to part from them with Traddles. The pair do eventually marry and settle down happily, and Sophie proves to be an invaluable aid in Traddles's legal career, while still helping her sisters. 36. Mr. Sharp. The chief teacher of Salem House, Mr. Sharp has more authority than Mr. Mel. Mr. Sharp looks weak, both in health and character. His head seems to be very heavy for him. He walks on one side and has a big nose. 37. Mr. Jorkins, the rarely seen partner of Mr. Spenlow. Spenlow uses Mr. Jorkins as a scapegoat for any unpopular decision he chooses to make, painting Jorkins as an inflexible tyrant, but Jorkins is, in fact, a meek and timid nonentity who, when confronted, takes the same track by blaming his inability to act on Mr. Spenlow. Now, let's see the plot summary of David Copperfield. The story follows the life of David Copperfield from childhood to maturity. David was born in Blunderstone, Suffolk, England, 6 months after the death of his father. David spends his early years residing in a small house called the Rookery. His loving and childish mother and their kindly housekeeper, Clara Peggotty, bring him up here, where they call him Davy. When he is 7 years old, his mother marries Edward Murdstone without having told him they plan to marry. To get him out of the way, David is sent to visit Peggotty's family in Yarmouth. Her brother, fisherman Mr. Peggotty, lives in a beached barge, with his adopted niece and nephew Emily and Ham, and an elderly widow, Mrs. Gummidge. Little Emily is somewhat spoiled by her fond foster father, and David is in love with her. They call him Master Copperfield. On his return, David discovers his mother has married and is immediately given good reason to dislike his stepfather, Murdstone, who believes exclusively in stern, harsh methods of parenting, calling it firmness. David has similar feelings for Murdstone's sister Jane, who moves into the house soon afterwards. Between them, they tyrannize David and his poor mother, making their lives miserable. When David falls behind in his studies, Murdstone thrashes him, and David bites his hand. In consequence, he is sent away to Salem House, a boarding school, under a ruthless headmaster named Mr. Creakle. There he is befriended by an older boy, James Steerforth, and Tommy Traddles. He develops an impassioned admiration for Steerforth, perceiving him as someone noble, who could do great things if he would, and one who pays attention to him. David goes home for the holidays to learn that his mother has given birth to a baby boy. Shortly after David returns to Salem House, his mother and her baby die, and David returns home immediately. Peggotty marries the local carrier, Mr. Burkiss. Murdstone sends David to work for a wine merchant in London, a business of which Murdstone is a joint owner. After some months, David's friendly but spendthrift landlord, Wilkins Micawber, is arrested for debt and sent to the King's Bench prison, and the rest of Mr. Micawber's family soon moves to the prison too. David visits the Micawbers regularly at the prison, and boards nearby. When Micawber's release is imminent, the Micawbers decide they will soon move to Plymouth. David realizes that will leave him alone in London, where no one cares about him. He makes up his mind to run away to Dover to find his only known remaining relative, his eccentric and kind-hearted great-aunt Betsy Trotwood. She had come to Blunderstone at his birth, only to depart in ire upon learning that he was not a girl. However, she takes it upon herself to raise David, despite Murdstone's attempt to regain custody of him. She encourages him to be as like his sister, Betsy Trotwood, as he can be, that is, to meet the expectations she had for the girl who was never born. David's great-aunt renames him Trotwood Copperfield and addresses him as Trot, one of several names others call David in the novel. David's aunt sends him to a better school than the last he attended. It is run by kind Dr. Strong, whose methods inculcate honor and self-reliance in his pupils. During term, David lodges with the lawyer Mr. Wickfield and his daughter Agnes, who becomes David's friend and confidant. Wickfield's clerk, Uriah Heep, also lives at the house. By devious means, Uriah Heep gradually gains a complete ascendancy over the aging and alcoholic Wickfield, to Agnes's great sorrow. Heep, as he maliciously confides to David, aspires to marry Agnes. Ultimately, with the aid of Micawber, who has been employed by Heep as a secretary, his fraudulent behavior is revealed. At the end of the book, David encounters him in prison, convicted of attempting to defraud the Bank of England. After completing school, David apprentices to be a proctor, a type of attorney. During this time, due to Heap's fraudulent activities, his aunt's fortune has diminished. David toils to make a living. He works mornings and evenings for his former teacher Dr. Strong as a secretary, and also starts to learn shorthand, with the help of his old school friend Traddles, upon completion reporting parliamentary debate for a newspaper. With considerable moral support from Agnes and his own great diligence and hard work, David ultimately finds fame and fortune as an author, writing fiction. David's romantic but self-serving school friend, Steerforth, also reacquainted with David, goes on to seduce and dishonor Emily, offering to marry her off to his manservant Littimer before deserting her in Europe. Her uncle, Mr. Peggotty, manages to find her with the help of Martha, who had grown up in their part of England and then settled in London. Ham, who had been engaged to marry Emily before the tragedy, dies in a fierce storm off the coast while rescuing shipwreck victims. Steerforth was aboard the ship and also dies. Mr. Peggotty takes Emily to a new life in Australia, accompanied by Mrs. Gummidge and the Micawbers, where all eventually find security and happiness. Meanwhile, David has fallen in love with Dora Spenlow and marries her. Their marriage proves troublesome for David in the sense of everyday practical affairs, but he never stops loving her. Dora dies early in their marriage after a miscarriage. After Dora's death, Agnes encourages David to return to normal life and his profession of writing. While living in Switzerland to dispel his grief over so many losses, David realizes that he loves Agnes. Upon returning to Britain, after a failed attempt to conceal his feelings, David finds that Agnes loves him too. They quickly marry, and in this marriage he finds true happiness. David and Agnes then have at least 5 children, including a daughter named after his great-aunt, Betsy Trotwood. Thank you very much, viewers, for the video to the last. Hope to see you in the next video.